My sister sat across from me in black silk, dabbing tears that weren't real, while a cardiologist walked into my father's will reading, carrying proof that someone had been slowly killing me. How did a family meeting about inheritance turn into an attempted murder case? My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 36 years old. I work for a nonprofit in Portland, helping elderly people who have no one left to fight for them. I'm usually the calm one, the practical one, the woman who handles crisis for a living. But nothing in my training prepared me for the day my own family tried to bury me while I was still breathing. If you stay with me, I'll tell you exactly how it happened. It began in a quiet office that smelled like leather and dust and old paper, my father's attorney's office in Columbus, Ohio. The kind of place where voices automatically lower themselves, where grief is expected to behave politely. My hands would not stop shaking. I pressed them together in my lap, fingers laced tight, hoping no one would notice the tremor. But tremors have a way of telling the truth your mouth is trying to hide. My heart was beating in that irregular, sickening rhythm I had come to know too well, too fast, then too slow, then tripping over itself like it couldn't decide whether to keep going. 3 weeks earlier, I had believed stress was doing this to me. Now I knew better. Across from me, my younger sister Emily looked like she had stepped out of a magazine spread titled "Daughter Devoted Beyond Measure." Her dress was designer. Her hair fell in careful waves. Even the way she cried was elegant fingertips to the corner of her eye. Pause, inhale, brave little nod. If grief gave awards, Emily would have been holding the trophy. Our mother sat beside her, clutching her arm as if Emily were the only solid thing left in the world. She would not look at me, not once. It was as if I were a draft coming through a cracked window, inconvenient, easily ignored. I wondered, not for the first time, how it was possible to feel like an intruder at your own father's will, reading. Sarah's always been dramatic, Emily had told relatives during the past weeks. I had overheard it more than once, whispered kindly, regretfully, persuasively. She's under a lot of emotional strain. You know how she gets. You know how she gets. As if my body collapsing were a personality flaw. The attorney, Mr. Harrison, adjusted his glasses and reached for a sealed envelope resting on the desk. My father had left instructions, he explained gently, that certain steps be followed in a particular order. My pulse thudded in my throat. Dad had been many things distant, quiet, a man who swallowed conflict until it calcified inside him, but he had never been careless. If he had arranged something, it meant he had been trying to fix what he could with the time he had left. Harrison broke the seal, but instead of reading, he stopped. His eyes moved to the door. "There is someone Richard asked to be present before we continue," he said. The handle turned, and that was the moment the air changed. When Dr. Briggs, our family cardiologist for more than 20 years, stepped inside, carrying a slim folder and a small USB drive. I felt Emily's posture snap beside me, just a flicker, a tightening, gone almost instantly, but I saw it. Why would a heart doctor attend a will reading? I think part of me already knew. I think my body had known for days. I just hadn't been ready to admit it. Doctor. Briggs gave me a look, not the warm, familiar smile he used during routine appointments, but something heavier. Something that said, "Be steady now." My mouth went dry. Harrison folded his hands. "Before we discuss the estate," he said carefully, "your father wanted everyone to see something. See something. Not hear. See." Emily shifted in her chair. "I don't understand," she said softly, wounded confusion, perfected to an art form. I almost admired her. Almost. Because 3 weeks ago, I would have believed her. 3 weeks ago, when I had rushed back to Ohio after the call that my father's lungs were failing, when I had taken emergency leave from the job I loved without hesitation, when I had walked into my childhood home hoping that maybe this time things would be different. 3 weeks ago, I still thought blood meant safety. I didn't know then that love could be rearranged like furniture, that loyalties could be traded, that someone could smile while calculating the rate at which your heart might give out. If you had met me back in Portland, you would have met a woman who advocated for abandoned seniors, who believed fiercely in dignity, who trusted that doing good in the world mattered. I still believe that. But I also know now that goodness does not make you immune to betrayal. I sat there in that office, my pulse stumbling, my sister performing sorrow, my mother turned away, and my father's doctor holding a device that could detonate everything we pretended to be. And as the screen behind Harrison flickered to life, one thought kept repeating in my mind over and over. Dad knew, he had known, which meant he had seen what was happening to me, which meant I had not been crazy, and which meant that in the next few minutes, my family would either fall apart or finally tell the truth. But to understand why my father felt the need to record his own daughter in secret, to understand why my medication, the pills keeping my heart alive, became the center of a crime, you have to go back to the day I came home. I used to believe that going home meant stepping back into something familiar, predictable, safe in the way old memories are supposed to be safe. I told myself that whatever distance had grown between me and my family over the years would shrink in the face of illness, that impending loss would sand down old resentments until all that remained was love. I was wrong. When my phone rang in Portland and my mother told me my father's lungs were failing, that the doctors were using words like end stage and comfort measures, I didn't even finish packing properly. I threw clothes into a bag, sent an email to my supervisor asking for emergency leave, and started the 9-hour drive to Columbus with a thermos of coffee and a head full of rehearsed forgiveness. I thought I was returning to help. I didn't realize I was walking back into a role that had already been cast without me. By the time I pulled into the driveway of the house where I grew up, Emily had become the hero of the story. Her car was parked in the front like a flag planted in conquered land. The porch light was on, warm and inviting, and for a brief, foolish second, I felt grateful. Maybe they were waiting for me. Maybe someone would open the door before I even reached it. Emily did open it. She wore an apron. Her hair was tied back in a loose, tired knot. There was flour on her sleeve, like she had been baking something wholesome and selfless. She looked exhausted in a way that photographs beautifully, the kind of exhaustion that says, "Look how much I have given." "Sarah," she breathed, and stepped forward to hug me. Her arms wrapped around me, soft, careful, but her cheek never quite touched mine. It was the outline of help, the rehearsal of comfort. "I'm so glad you made it," she said. Behind her, my mother appeared in the hallway, already reaching for Emily's shoulder. "She's been incredible," Mom said, pride shining through her grief. "I don't know what we would do without her." Not, "We're glad you're here too." Not, "That must have been a long drive." Not even, "How are you holding up?" I entered the house like a guest who had arrived late to a ceremony already in progress. The air smelled like antiseptic and overcooked vegetables. A hospital bed had been set up in the living room, oxygen tubes coiling across the carpet. Machines hummed with patient indifference. My father lay propped against white pillows, smaller than I remembered, as if illness had been quietly folding him inward. But when his eyes found mine, they lit, truly lit, and for the first time since I got the call, my throat closed. "Sarah," he whispered. I went to him immediately, took his hand, felt how fragile and papery his skin had become, but his grip tightened with surprising strength, like he was afraid I might vanish if he didn't anchor me there. "I need to talk to you," he murmured. "About the will, about why I—" The interruption came fast and cheerful. "Oh, honey, visiting hours," Mom said, bustling forward with the authority of someone who had decided what was best. Emily followed, already adjusting the oxygen line, checking monitors, rearranging blankets that did not need rearranging. The moment collapsed. Dad's eyes flicked toward Emily, and there was something in them I couldn't decode then. Something tight, something almost apologetic. I told myself I would come back later, that we had time. We did not. Dinner that night unfolded like a performance staged for an audience I couldn't see. Emily moved constantly, refilling glasses, touching Mom's arm, updating me on medication schedules I had not asked about. She spoke the language of responsibility fluently, generously translating it so everyone would understand how necessary she had become. At some point, she smiled at me across the table, gentle, reasonable. "You know, Dad has so many prescriptions now," she said. "It might be easier if we keep everything together, one cabinet. That way nothing gets missed." Mom nodded immediately. "That's smart." I hesitated. For 5 years, I had managed my heart condition myself. The pills lived in my bag, in my coat pocket, on my nightstand. I took them without fail. Independence had become a form of dignity for me, proof that I wasn't as fragile as everyone seemed to think. But I could already feel the weight of resistance in the room, the suggestion that refusing would make me difficult, selfish, dramatic. Emily's eyes were warm, encouraging. "Less stress for you too," she added. "Less stress." I surrendered. "Okay," I said, and passed her my bottle. If you want to know when the ground began to open beneath me, it was that simple, that quiet. A plastic container sliding across a wooden table. Later, as I lay awake in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling I had memorized as a child, unease moved through me like a draft. Not yet fear, just displacement, the sense that I had returned to something that no longer had space shaped like me. Down the hall, I could hear Emily's low voice talking to Mom, offering reassurances, making plans for the night. Every word positioned her deeper at the center of things. I wondered when I had drifted so far to the edges. I told myself families reorganize during crisis. Of course they do. Whoever shows up first becomes essential. I had come late, that was all. But even then, even before the whispers in the study, before the pills began to change, before my heart started writing messages my brain refused to read, I felt it. I felt the story tightening. I just didn't know yet that I was the one being written out of it. Sleep did not come easily in that house. It never really had, not when I was a child, not when doors closed a little too firmly or voices carried meanings that shifted once you entered the room. But that first night back, exhaustion should have knocked me unconscious. I had driven 9 hours. My father was dying 10 feet away. My life in Portland had been folded into a suitcase by panic. Still, I lay awake. The mattress felt smaller than I remembered, the air too thick. Every time I drifted toward rest, my heart jerked me back with a sudden, violent thud, like a fist pounding on the inside of my ribs. I told myself it was grief. What else could it be? Around midnight, my mouth went dry, so dry it felt lined with paper. I slipped out of bed, careful, instinctively quiet, the way you become quiet in houses where emotions are always near the surface. The hallway light was off, but a thin gold line cut across the carpet from beneath my father's study door. Someone was awake. I almost kept walking. It would have been the polite thing, the safe thing, to get water and return upstairs, to remain the cooperative daughter who didn't intrude. But then I heard my name. I froze. It was Marcus first, Emily's boyfriend, his voice low and urgent, shaped by the kind of confidence men mistake for intelligence. "The insurance policy is worth more than the savings," he whispered. "A lot more." There was rustling, the slide of paper. Emily answered, and the softness she used in daylight was gone. "If we change the beneficiary now, while he can still technically sign." My skin tightened. What beneficiary? What change? Marcus exhaled through his nose. "We just need timing. After that, it won't matter." A pause stretched between them. I could hear the hum of the oxygen machine from the living room, steady, mechanical, the metronome of my father's remaining life. Then Emily said my name again. "What about Sarah?" I leaned closer before I even realized I was moving. Marcus gave a small laugh. Not loud, not cruel, just practical. "She'll fight it. You said she always does." "She'll think something's wrong," Emily whispered. Another pause, and then the sentence that split my world clean in half. "That's why she can't be in any condition to fight," Marcus said. My heart slammed so hard I thought they must hear it through the door. Emily didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice had hardened into something I had never heard from her before, something old and sharp and tired. "She's always been the fragile one," she said. "Maybe it's time everyone else sees that too." I stepped back as if someone had shoved me. They couldn't mean what it sounded like. They couldn't. Families argued about money. Families whispered ugly things under stress. People said things they didn't intend. That was normal. Normal did not include planning my incapacity like a scheduling problem. My lungs forgot how to work. I forced air in, out, slow, careful. If I burst into the room now, they would have explanations ready. They would twist it, fold it, lay it at my feet until I apologized for misunderstanding. I had lived that dance before, so I did the only thing I could. I retreated. In the kitchen, the refrigerator light felt blinding. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the counter to stay upright. I drank water without tasting it, my mind racing through possibilities, defenses, denials. They're scared. They're stressed. You're interpreting it wrong. But something colder than logic had already settled inside me. I walked to the dining room cabinet. The door creaked when I opened it, loud as a confession. Bottles lined the shelf in neat rows, labels facing forward like soldiers awaiting inspection. Dad's medications, Mom's vitamins, Emily's supplements, and mine. I picked up my bottle of metoprolol. The child-proof cap felt slightly loose. Maybe I had closed it badly earlier, I told myself. Maybe Emily had checked the dosage, making sure I was taking it correctly. She had been so attentive, after all, so helpful. Still, I poured a few pills into my palm. They looked right. White, round, imprinted, but not exactly. 2 of them were a shade lighter, almost imperceptibly so, like paper left in the sun too long. If I hadn't been afraid, I might not have noticed. If I had trusted her, I definitely wouldn't have. My stomach turned. I remembered Marcus's voice. She can't be in any condition to fight. I remembered Emily. She's always been the fragile one. I stood there in the dark kitchen, holding the evidence of something I was still not brave enough to name. Because naming it would mean accepting that my own sister might prefer me weakened, might even prefer me gone. And what kind of person thinks that about their family? The kind who is right, a voice inside me whispered. I put the pills back carefully, exactly the way they had been. If something was happening, I needed them to believe I suspected nothing. Upstairs, I locked my bedroom door for the first time since arriving. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my fingers to my wrist, counting beats, bargaining with them. Stay steady, stay predictable. Don't betray me tonight. Tears came then, hot and humiliating, not because I was certain, but because I was no longer certain of anything. Had Emily always resented me this much? Had I been blind? Or had love made me stupid? I thought about the way she had hugged me at the door, careful not to touch her cheek to mine, the way Mom had praised her before even saying hello to me, the way Dad had tried to speak and been interrupted. Pieces were moving, and for the first time, I wondered if they had been moving long before I came home. I barely slept, and when morning arrived, pale and indifferent, I carried one terrifying understanding with me down the stairs. Either I was losing my mind, or someone in that house was trying to help my heart fail. The paranoia turns physical, the gaslighting deepens, and Sarah's isolation becomes unbearable. I woke the next morning determined to be rational. That was the word I clung to while brushing my teeth, while braiding my hair back from a face that looked more frightened than I wanted it to. Rational people did not accuse their sisters of poisoning them because of an overheard fragment of conversation and a slightly different shade of white. Rational people gathered proof. Rational people did not panic. So I went downstairs with my pulse already misbehaving and told myself I would observe, not react. Emily stood at the stove, scrambling eggs, moving with efficient tenderness, the picture of domestic devotion. Mom sat at the table with a mug of coffee cupped in both hands, her shoulders rounded by exhaustion. For a moment, watching them, I almost convinced myself that the night before had been some grotesque misunderstanding. Emily looked up and smiled at me, soft and worried. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," I lied. Her gaze lingered on my face a second too long, like she was studying the results of something. "Good," she said gently. "You need your strength." I nodded, wondering if she could hear how violently my heart was beating. After breakfast, she brought the medication box to the table, organizing pills into neat little paper cups the way nurses do in hospitals. Efficient, caring, visible. She handed Dad's first, then Mom's. Mine came last. "Here you go," she said. Our fingers brushed. Her skin was warm. I swallowed the pills from the cabinet while she watched. I hated myself for doing it, hated the helplessness of it, the surrender. But if I refused, she would know. If she knew, whatever they were planning would shift into something I might never see coming. So I smiled. "Thanks," I said. "If courage had a taste, it was chalk and terror dissolving on your tongue." By afternoon, my heart began its rebellion. Not during effort, not while lifting or climbing, but at random, cruel moments, sitting still, folding laundry, standing at the sink. A sudden gallop that left me dizzy and breathless, as if my body were running from something I could not outrun. Grief, I told myself. Stress. You are primed to suspect. But the episodes kept coming. When I stood too quickly, the room tilted. I had to grab the banister halfway up the stairs, my legs trembling like I'd just finished a marathon instead of carrying a glass of water. I tried to hide it. I didn't want to give Emily material. Yet hiding it only made her appear more generous. She was always there, too quickly, a hand at my elbow. A voice pitched perfectly between concern and patience. "You should sit down," she would murmur. "I've got it." I began to notice how often she said that. "I've got it. I've got dinner. I've got Dad's medication. I've got Mom. I've got the paperwork. I've got Sarah." As if I were another responsibility she had graciously absorbed, as if my existence strengthened her resume. By the third day, exhaustion sank into my bones so deeply I felt hollowed out by it. I slept and woke tired. My chest ached with a tight, electric pressure that made every breath deliberate. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and startled. I looked ill, truly ill, gray at the edges. I understood then how easily a story could be told about me. Look at her. She's always had problems. So dramatic. Reality is fragile when enough people repeat the same lie. That afternoon, I tried one more time. Mom was in the kitchen rinsing vegetables, her back to me, shoulders stiff. I hovered in the doorway, suddenly 10 years old again, desperate for a softness that rarely came. "Mom," I said, "I don't feel right." She didn't turn. "Of course you don't," she replied. "Your father is dying." "It's more than that," I pressed. "My heart, it's racing. I feel faint a lot." She sighed then, a sound heavy with long practice. "Emily is exhausted too, Sarah. But she doesn't complain every 5 minutes." The words struck harder than shouting would have. I stared at her back, waiting for her to turn around, to see me, to notice that I was scared. She never did. I left the kitchen smaller than I had entered it. That evening, relatives came by with casseroles and condolences, the house filled with murmurs, sympathetic touches, admiration for Emily's devotion. I watched my sister move through them like a saint in soft lighting. Whenever I tried to speak, someone redirected the conversation. "Emily says you've been under a lot of strain. Emily told us you tend to get anxious. Emily is so worried about you. Emily, Emily, Emily." The narrative wrapped around me like plastic, airtight, suffocating. At one point, my aunt took my hand, squeezed it with rehearsed kindness. "Try not to make this harder than it already is," she whispered. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. Because what defense did I have? A feeling? A color difference in a pill? A late-night conversation I could never prove? Emily brought me tea before bed. Chamomile. Steam curling between us like something holy. "You scared me today," she said softly. "The way you looked on the stairs." "I'm okay," I replied. Her eyes held mine. "I hope so," she said. Hope. As if the outcome were still undecided. That night, I lay awake again, my pulse fluttering erratically, and a terrible realization unfolded inside me. If I grew sicker, if I collapsed, if my heart finally failed under the strain, Emily would be blameless. She would be heroic. She would be the sister who tried so hard. And I would become what they already believed I was. Weak, difficult, tragic, convenient. Tears slipped into my ears as I stared at the dark ceiling. I thought about Portland, about the seniors I helped advocate for how often they told me they felt invisible long before anyone abandoned them. I had always listened with compassion. I had never understood that invisibility could begin at home. Somewhere down the hall, I heard Emily moving, a cabinet door opening, closing. My heart stumbled again, wild and terrified. And for the first time, I admitted the truth without softening it, without mercy, without excuses. If I stayed passive, I might not survive this house. By the end of that week, my body was no longer asking for my attention. It was demanding it. The palpitations came like ambushes. I would be standing perfectly still, rinsing a plate, folding a blanket, watching my father sleep, and suddenly my heart would leap into a frantic sprint, slamming against my ribs so violently that my vision blurred at the edges. Sweat prickled down my back. My fingers tingled. The world tilted just enough to make me wonder whether this was the moment it would finally win. I became careful about falling. I mapped the furniture in my mind, memorized where I could grab onto something if the floor rushed up at me. Pride disappeared. Survival rearranges you that way. Emily noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "You look worse today," she said one afternoon, appearing beside me with that gentle efficiency she wore like perfume. "Maybe you should lie down." I searched her face for guilt, for triumph, for anything. What I saw instead was attentiveness so convincing it almost broke me. If she was acting, she deserved an award. If she wasn't, then I was losing my mind. I excused myself, went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and pressed both palms to my eyes until colors burst behind them. I tried to breathe through the panic, but my heart kept tripping, misfiring, stuttering in ways that felt wrong, medically wrong, not emotional. I had lived with this condition for 5 years. I knew its moods. I knew the difference between anxiety and malfunction. This was malfunction, and underneath it, a whisper I could no longer silence. What if they've already done it? The thought landed with a clarity that frightened me more than the symptoms themselves. Because once you allow the possibility of betrayal, everything rearranges around it. Every kindness becomes strategy. Every touch becomes positioning. I picked up my phone. I almost put it down 3 times before I pressed call. Dr. Briggs had been my father's cardiologist long before he became mine. He had guided Dad through a heart attack 10 years ago, had sat at our kitchen table explaining stents and blood thinners while Emily cried and Mom asked practical questions. He was steady, methodical, a man who believed in data. If anyone would tell me I was wrong, it would be him. And maybe I wanted him to. "Sarah?" he said when he answered. "Is everything all right?" "No," I almost said. "Nothing is." But I kept it simple. "I need to come in." He heard something in my voice because he didn't argue. "Today," he said. "I'll make room." I didn't tell my family where I was going. I said I needed air, that I would be back soon. Emily offered to drive me, of course. She always offered. I declined with a smile I hoped didn't look like fear. The clinic felt unreal, fluorescent, and overly bright, as if illness there was orderly and manageable, not the slow erosion happening in my parents' house. A nurse drew blood, machines hummed. I waited on crinkling paper, staring at a poster about cholesterol. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When Dr. Briggs came back into the room, he closed the door behind him more firmly than usual. He held my chart but wasn't looking at it. He was looking at me. "Sarah," he said carefully, "I need you to walk me through exactly how you've been taking your medication." "Every day," I replied immediately. "I never miss." "How much?" 100 milligrams. He nodded once, then exhaled. "Your levels are almost non-existent," he said. The words didn't land. I blinked at him. "What?" "You should have close to 100 milligrams in your system," he continued gently. "I'm seeing traces of maybe 10, if that." I laughed. It came out wrong, brittle, and high. "That's impossible." I take it. Emily hands it to me. I swallow it in front of her. The moment I said her name, something changed in his expression. Not accusation, not disbelief. Recognition. "There's something else," he said. My throat tightened. "Your father called me 3 weeks ago." My pulse roared in my ears. He asked hypothetical questions. Dr. Briggs continued. "What happens if someone stops taking their beta blockers suddenly? What symptoms would appear? How fast damage could occur?" I gripped the edge of the table. "I assumed he was worried about himself," he said quietly. "But now," he didn't finish. He didn't have to. Dad had known. Or at least, he had suspected. While I was still apologizing for doubting my sister, My dying father had been trying to understand how someone might harm me without leaving bruises. A strange calm spread through me then, cold and sharp and absolute. Terror clarified into direction. If I start taking the correct dose again, I asked, will I stabilize? Yes, he said immediately. You should feel improvement within days. But Sarah, if someone is interfering, you cannot confront them without protection. Protection. I nodded as if I understood how to get such a thing. I left with a new prescription in my hand, and the world tilted on a different axis than the one I had entered with. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove across town to a pharmacy where no one knew my name, where no one would recognize my face from childhood or connect me to my sister's careful narrative. I paid, waited, accepted the small white bag like it contained oxygen. In the parking lot, I opened it. Real medication. Verified, untouched. I took one right there, dry swallowed, desperate. Then I sat behind the steering wheel and let the truth settle. I had not imagined it. I had not exaggerated. My body had been telling the story accurately all along. Someone had been reducing my dosage. Someone had been watching me weaken, and smiling while they did it. I wiped my face, started the engine, and practiced my expression in the rearview mirror until it resembled something close to normal. Because when I walked back into that house, I would still take the pills from the cabinet. I would thank Emily. I would play fragile. But underneath it, something fundamental had shifted. I was done waiting to be saved. If my father had suspected, if he had tried in his own quiet way to leave breadcrumbs behind, then I would follow them. Whatever I found at the end, Sarah is no longer reacting, she is planning. The first morning after I saw Dr. Briggs, I woke before sunrise with a secret under my tongue. The real pill had dissolved hours earlier, already moving through my bloodstream, already beginning the slow repair of what someone had tried very carefully to undo. My heart still felt bruised, uncertain, but there was a steadiness beneath the chaos now, like a compass needle remembering which way was north. For the first time in days, I did not wake in panic. I woke in strategy. I dressed slowly, deliberately, practicing fatigue in the mirror, shoulders slightly rounded, movements careful, a woman who might faint if she turned too quickly. If Emily believed the medication switch was working, she would relax, and relaxed people made mistakes. Downstairs, the house was already humming with the rituals of illness. The oxygen concentrator whispered beside my father's bed. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen. I could hear Emily's voice moving from room to room, narrating competence. "I've got it," she said to Mom. Of course she did. When she brought the medication box to the table, I was ready. Dad's pills first, Mom's next, then mine. In the small paper cup, the rattle of betrayal disguised as care. "There you go," she said warmly. I took them. I even held her gaze while I swallowed. If acting had a taste, it was bitterness and restraint. "Thank you," I added. Her smile deepened, satisfied, almost proud. Somewhere inside her, she was measuring progress, calculating outcomes, waiting for my collapse to confirm her narrative. I wondered how long she thought she had. The answer came sooner than I expected. By the third day of secretly taking the real medication, the worst of the dizziness had begun to fade. My heart still fluttered, still bore the scar of those stolen weeks, but it no longer raced itself into oblivion without warning. Strength returned in cautious increments, enough that I had to remind myself to limp emotionally, if not physically. Improvement was dangerous. If I looked too well, questions would follow. So I let myself remain pale, quiet. I rested often where she could see me. But when Emily was busy with Dad, when Mom dozed in her chair, I moved. The family computer sat in the den, screen smudged, history carelessly intact. Emily had never been particularly tech-savvy. She believed intention mattered more than evidence. She had always assumed that if she felt justified, the world would cooperate. I sat down and began to scroll. At first, nothing. Grocery lists, articles about caregiver burnout, inspirational quotes about daughters and sacrifice. Then I dug deeper. Shopping tabs, supplement suppliers, empty gelatin capsules, calcium carbonate powder, pill dye kits. How to match prescription tablet color. My mouth went dry, but my hands stayed steady. I photographed everything with my phone. Dates, receipts, tracking confirmations, enough to establish pattern, enough to show planning, not panic. Planning. I moved to the cabinet next. I had brought small plastic bags in my pocket, folded flat like guilty thoughts. When I poured a few of the lighter pills into my palm this time, I did not hesitate. I sealed them, marked the date in my notes app, returned the bottle exactly as I had found it, every motion rehearsed, every breath measured. I had crossed a line somewhere between terror and clarity. The girl who wanted her mother to turn around in the kitchen and choose her had gone quiet. In her place stood someone my sister did not know. That night, my father gave me a gift. It was late. The house had settled into that fragile stillness that comes after exhaustion wins. I was sitting beside his bed, holding his hand, listening to the uneven whistle of oxygen, when his eyes opened with startling focus. "Sarah," he whispered. I leaned closer immediately. "I'm here." His fingers tightened around mine, surprisingly strong, urgent. "I put a camera," he said, each word scraped from somewhere deep. "In my study." I thought, someone was going through my papers. The room seemed to tilt. "What did you see?" I asked. "Didn't know yet," he breathed. But I was afraid. Afraid. My father, who had spent a lifetime avoiding confrontation, had been afraid enough to record his own home. "The bookshelf," he continued. "Bottom drawer, locked box. Combination is your birthday." Tears burned my eyes. He remembered. "Everything you need," he whispered. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. "Emily." Dad's gaze flicked toward the door, and in that look I saw apology, shame, love, regret, a lifetime of things he had never been brave enough to say. "Don't trust." The coughing took him before he could finish. Emily rushed in, efficient, concerned, sliding the oxygen mask back into place, positioning herself between us with seamless instinct. "Too much excitement," she murmured. Her hand rested on my shoulder, a warning disguised as comfort. By morning, Dad had slipped into unconsciousness. He would never speak again. I waited until the house surrendered to sleep the following night. Marcus had gone home. Mom had taken something to help her rest. Emily's door clicked shut down the hall. I counted to 300. Then I moved. The study smelled like dust and old books and my father's aftershave. Memory hit me in waves, but I forced myself to stay present. Bottom drawer, locked metal box, my birthday, July 15th. The latch released with a sound that seemed louder than thunder. Inside was a USB drive, a sealed envelope addressed to Harrison, and a letter with my name written in my father's uneven hand. I touched it, just for a second, but I didn't open it, not yet. Evidence first, grief later. As I slipped the USB into my pocket, I heard a floorboard creak behind me. Emily stood in the doorway. "Looking for something?" she asked pleasantly. My pulse kicked, but it did not spiral. "Memories," I replied. She smiled. "You should rest," she said. "You look terrible lately." I held her gaze. "I'm feeling better," I answered softly. And for the briefest moment, I saw it. Fear. Masks fall. Truth becomes public. Grief has a strange way of organizing people. At the funeral, it arranged us exactly as it always had. Emily stood at the center, folded into condolences, receiving sympathy like communion. People held her hands longer than necessary. They told her she had been extraordinary, tireless, devoted. Marcus hovered near her shoulder with solemn approval, the loyal partner of the grieving heroine. My mother leaned into Emily as if she might dissolve without her, and I stood slightly apart, close enough to be seen, far enough to be unnecessary. I watched my sister cry with perfect timing. I wondered if she had practiced. I wondered if she slept at night. I wondered if she ever thought about the sound my heart had made when it misfired, or if she had only ever heard money. I did not confront her there. The funeral was theater, and I had already chosen a different stage. In the days that followed, I met privately with Harrison. I brought the USB drive, my photographs, The lab confirmation that the pills contained nothing but calcium and dye. I expected shock, outrage. What I saw instead was something colder, understanding. Dad had not been paranoid, Harrison told me. In the last weeks of his life, he had made very specific arrangements. If certain circumstances arose, certain evidence was to be presented before the will could be finalized. He had known, not everything, but enough. I asked Harrison to invite Dr. Briggs. I wanted authority in the room when the lies collapsed. The morning of the reading arrived gray and windless. The sky stretched thin like it might tear. I dressed carefully, choosing something simple, something that would not distract from the facts. I did not want drama. I wanted clarity. Emily arrived in black again, elegant and composed, her grief now polished into dignity. Marcus kissed her cheek before taking a seat in the outer office, visible through the glass partition, close enough to witness victory, far enough to avoid discomfort. When she saw me, Emily offered a small, almost pitying smile. "You holding up?" she asked. "Yes," I said. Harrison began with the ordinary things. The house would be divided equally between both daughters. The main savings account, $150,000, also divided evenly. Emily nodded with each announcement, solemn, patient, already calculating beyond them. She knew about the larger inheritance. I could see it in the way anticipation tightened her posture. She had built everything around it. Then Harrison cleared his throat. "There is a separate account," he said, maintained as individual property, inherited from Richard's parents. Emily leaned forward. I watched hope rise in her like sunrise. "The balance is $400,000, Harrison continued, and it is to be transferred in its entirety to Sarah Mitchell. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Emily stood. "That's not right," she said immediately. "That money was supposed to be—" She stopped. Too late. "Supposed to be what?" Harrison folded his hands. "There are additional instructions," he said calmly. "Richard requested that certain materials be presented at this time." The door opened. Dr. Briggs entered. Through the glass, I saw Marcus change color. A cardiologist did not appear at inheritance celebrations unless hearts were involved, and not in the sentimental sense. Marcus rose halfway from his chair, sat again, stood fully. I held his eyes. He understood. By the time Harrison connected the USB to the screen, Marcus was gone. 1 second there, the next, an empty chair spinning slowly. I heard the outer door open, then close hard enough to rattle the frame. Cowards prefer motion to consequences. No one went after him. We were all watching the screen. The first video showed the dining room at night, the camera angled from high on the bookshelf. Emily entered in pajamas, hair loose around her shoulders, moving with terrible calm. She opened my prescription bottle and began exchanging pills, one by one, methodical, unhurried. There was no confusion in her movements, no hesitation. This was not panic. This was intention. My mother made a sound beside me, something between a gasp and a plea. But the footage continued. Marcus, in the study, papers spread across the desk, explaining beneficiary forms, timelines, signatures. His voice filled the room, confident, instructional. "If he can't hold the pen, guide his hand," he said. "No one questions a dying man." Emily's voice answered, uncertain but willing. "And Sarah?" Marcus shrugged. "If she's too sick to fight, it won't matter." The air left my lungs in a slow, measured exit. I had heard it before through the door. Now everyone else heard it too. Emily shook her head at the screen, backing away from herself as if it were a stranger. "I didn't," she began, he said, but the camera had no interest in revisions. Then came the worst part. My mother appeared in the doorway of the dining room. She watched. She saw Emily's hands, the pills, the exchange. She stood there for nearly a minute, and then she turned away. The video ended. Dr. Briggs spoke next. Clinical, precise. He described my blood work. The absence of medication, the permanent damage now written into my heart muscle. 25 to 30% reduction. Irreversible. Words with weight. They settled onto every surface. I turned to my mother. "You knew," I said. It was not accusation anymore. It was history. She began to cry before she could answer. Emily spun toward the hallway. "Where's Marcus?" she demanded. But we all knew. Marcus had loved her exactly as long as she had been useful. Harrison lifted his phone. "I contacted the police before we began," he said. Emily collapsed back into her chair, the architecture of righteousness dissolving. For a moment, she looked very young, very lost. "I just wanted to matter," she whispered. I believed her, and it changed nothing. The police arrived with the quiet efficiency of people who had already been warned. No sightings. No spectacle. Just 2 officers stepping into the wreckage of what used to be my family. Emily did not run. I think some part of her had already been running for years, chasing approval, chasing certainty, chasing the promise that if she were loved loudly enough, she would never have to question whether she deserved it. There was nowhere left to go now. The walls had closed in. The future she had built out of Marcus's assurances had evaporated in the time it took a USB drive to load. When the officers approached her, she stood automatically, like a child responding to a teacher calling her name. I didn't mean she started, but the sentence collapsed under its own weight. Because what did she not mean? To replace the pills? To watch me weaken? To hope nature would finish what she had begun? Intent had been recorded in high definition. One of the officers read her rights gently, not unkindly. Emily's hands trembled as they guided them behind her back. The click of metal sounded final in a way nothing else had yet. She turned toward me as they began leading her out. For a moment, I saw my sister at 8 years old, braids crooked, knees scabbed, furious when I beat her at board games. I saw birthday parties and shared bedrooms and whispered alliances against imagined enemies. I saw the person she might have been. I was supposed to be the one he loved, she cried, the words tearing out of her like they had been waiting her whole life. They said I was special. I was the one who mattered. And then I find out he was saving everything for you? Her mascara broke apart, black rivers down her cheeks. Marcus said he understood. She choked. He said he would help me fix it. Fix it. As if I were the error, the officers pulled her through the doorway. Her voice echoed down the corridor, dissolving into distance. I did not follow. I stayed in my chair, staring at the space she had occupied, feeling not triumph, but a bone-deep exhaustion. Revenge stories are supposed to taste like victory. What I felt tasted like ashes. Marcus did not make it far. Harrison received the call less than 3 hours later. They found him at the airport with a carry-on bag and $50,000 in cash, money he had siphoned from Emily's credit cards while whispering about their shared future. Partnership, apparently, had an expiration date. Under questioning, he unraveled quickly. Men like Marcus always believe they are the smartest person in the room until the room contains evidence. Then they become historians, rewriting events in whatever way leaves them least responsible. He claimed Emily had hated me long before he arrived, that he had only given shape to feelings she already carried, that he had tried to slow her down. But the videos told a different story. Marcus instructing, Marcus calculating timelines, Marcus explaining exactly how long my heart would take to fail. Emily had been desperate. Marcus had been strategic. Between them, I had almost died. By the time the statements were taken and the officers left, the building had emptied into a strange, ringing quiet. Harrison retreated to make calls. Doctor. Briggs squeezed my shoulder, promised to check on me tomorrow, and disappeared into the elevator. And then it was just my mother and me. She sat in my father's chair as if she had fallen into it and could not find the strength to rise again. Smaller than I remembered, older, a woman stripped of the narratives she had relied on. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I could hear traffic below, a door closing somewhere far down the hall. The ordinary continuation of a world that did not care what had ended here. Finally, she whispered, "When you were 6. The words entered the room like ghosts. Emily was 2, she continued, and I was drowning. I didn't know what it was then. No one talked about postpartum depression. You were just expected to cope. I stood very still. Emily got sick, Mom said. Really sick. The doctors weren't sure she would live. I was terrified all the time, and every time you needed something too, I felt myself splitting in half, her hands twisted together. I told your father I wanted to give you up, she said. The sentence did not explode. It sank, heavy, predictable. He refused, she rushed on. We fought for weeks, so we sent you to your grandmother, just until I got better, I said, just until Emily stabilized. But time has a way of hardening temporary decisions into permanent ones. When you came back, she whispered, you looked at me like I had abandoned you, and you were right, I had. Tears slid down her face unchecked. So I couldn't face it, she said. It was easier to pour everything into Emily, to prove I could be a good mother to someone. And the longer I did it, the harder it became to stop, because stopping meant admitting what I had done to you. I listened. 36 years of confusion rearranged themselves quietly into comprehension. I had not been unlovable. She had been ashamed. But shame, I realized, can be just as cruel as hatred. When you saw her with the pills, I asked, my voice steady, why didn't you stop her? Mom closed her eyes. Because if she was capable of that, she whispered, then it meant I had raised someone who could do it, and I couldn't survive knowing that. So she had chosen survival over me. I nodded once. Understanding is not forgiveness. It is simply clarity. I don't hate you, I said. She flinched, surprised. Hate would mean you still get to live inside me, I continued. But I am done trying to earn love from someone who couldn't give it. She began to cry harder. If you want a relationship with me, I said, you start from zero. You get help, real help, and you prove, over time, that you are capable of choosing me when it is difficult. I moved toward the door, then paused. What you did when I was 6, I added, created the wound. What you did 3 weeks ago made it fatal. I left her there with that truth, not as punishment, as fact. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, almost unfamiliar, as if I had stepped out of a house that had been burning for years and only just noticed the smoke. My heart beat unevenly in my chest, damaged, still mine. Stories like this stay with us long after the screen goes dark, not because of the crime itself, but because of the questions it leaves behind. How do people we love become capable of hurting us? How many warning signs do we ignore because believing the truth would shatter our idea of family? And when betrayal finally comes into the light, what does survival actually look like? Sarah's journey wasn't only about exposing what was done to her. It was about reclaiming her voice after a lifetime of being doubted, minimized, rewritten. The real victory wasn't the arrest, or the inheritance, or even the confession. It was the moment she chose to believe her own instincts and step out of the role others had assigned her. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever been made to feel invisible, dramatic, or too sensitive for noticing something was wrong, you are not alone. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Subscribe to Hanji Wie Iagi for more stories about truth, survival, and the quiet strength it takes to choose yourself. And if you feel ready, share your experiences in the comments. Someone out there might need your courage tonight.